Good evening and welcome to the NDTV YouTube channel. Here's where we give you an idea of some of the important stories that we are tracking today. And in terms of news which has just come in a little while back, this officer, Air Marshal R.K.S. Bhadauria, will be taking over as the new Chief of Air Staff. He replaces Air Chief Marshal Dhanoa, who retires at the end of this month. Now, his selection is interesting because it was actually a two-horse race, as it were, for the post of Air Chief between him and Air Marshal Nambiar. Finally, the government selected Air Marshal Bhadauria to take over as the new Air Force Chief. Now, this is the officer who's been very closely involved with the induction of the Rafale fighter, the first of which begin induction or being handed over to the Indian Air Force in France next month. So it's an important selection because he's also going to be involved in the overall induction period of the Indian Air Force, when several new aircraft are now actually coming in, whether they're new Tejas fighters, the Rafales themselves, or several other helicopters. But it's interesting that the selection process itself the announcement process took as long as it did, because usually you would know who the next air chief is about 3 months before the incumbent retires. But in this particular case, that was not the case. This was announced just a few weeks before, or less than a few weeks before, Air Chief Marshal Dhanoa was to retire. Speaking of the Air Force, this was Raj Nath Singh, the Defence Minister, who flew a sortie today on the indigenous Tejas fighter. This was in Bengaluru. The Tejas is a multi-role fighter. The Indian Air Force has inducted one squadron of the fighter so far. And as you can see over here, Raj Nath Singh waving to people in just before that sortie, which was flown by an Air Vice Marshal, where he got a first-hand idea of this jet. Now, it's a multi-role fighter. The Indian Air Force wants several Tejas fighters to be inducted, but the process of inducting these jets is actually going to take a long period of time. But in terms of a Make in India effort, this is very commendable, and this jet, despite its delays, has come a long way. Let's also take a look at some of the other stories that we are tracking today. An important statement made by the Prime Minister today as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. A lot of people would say that this is a big outreach effort by the Prime Minister, where, among other things, he mentioned to people in Jammu and Kashmir, and he was speaking in Nashik, that it's important to embrace people in Jammu and Kashmir. This comes again in a backdrop, the backdrop being more than a month since the clampdown in Jammu and Kashmir, political dissent not being allowed, mainstream political leaders being placed in behind bars or in sub-jails after the government decided to abrogate Article 370 and bifurcate the state. But now, in terms of an effort to reach out to people in Jammu and Kashmir, this is an important effort. And I think a lot of people would be looking at these remarks made by the Prime Minister in the context of what happens next. Is this an indicator that political leaders in Kashmir will be let out of their sub-jails? Will there be a return to normalcy in the state? These are issues which perhaps need to be looked at very closely as well. And finally, another story which I'm looking at very closely is the decision of the police in Jharkhand to reinstate murder charges against the 11 people who've been accused in the murder of the 24-year-old man from from Jharkhand, Tabrez Ansari. Now, this was a very sad case. It was in the month of June that Tabrez was brutally assaulted for 7 hours by a group which accused him of being a thief. Initially, 11 of the people who were involved in this assault were charged with murder. But that murder charge was inexplicably, a lot of people would say, removed on the grounds that he died of a heart attack. The eventual cause of death was a heart attack, when a lot of people would ask, and did ask, that yes, he may have died of a cardiac arrest, but what caused that cardiac arrest? There is a subsequent medical report which the police earlier didn't seem to refer to when they decided to drop those murder charges, that categorically says that the cardiac arrest was caused by the brutal assault that took place on Tabrez Ansari. That besides anything else, he had a severe fracture on his skull. So now those murder charges are back, but the big question continues to remain: who was protecting the killers of Tabrez? Who was responsible for this, particularly at a time when the government has made so many statements about the need to cut down on these lynching attacks which continue to take place in so many parts of the country.